put Jeremy Margolis on the chain?
Just put Grace on the chain. Mr. Baker.
You can forward these at the end of the
Gus
debate.
wants on too.
I know, but he's...
They need live updates? As the debate's going?
I keep telling him
No.
that,
Grace
and
literally said, I am so bored, please put me on the email chain. Okay.
Jeremy's gonna yell at me if I forget another one of these.
Okay. Vikas, Jeremy, Grace, anyone else?
Put my mom too.
Well, we should put Arnav. That means
Yeah.
so getting through.
Sorry. You sent an email that says new exclamation mark. What is that?
Yeah, new people.
Oh, new. Okay. Not like new af.
It is a new
It is a
app,
new
actually.
Oh, okay.
We
Okay.
we cut one uniqueness up.
But because there's no plan, you should assume we're debating, basically. We have no idea what's going on.
You're debating a limitless.
Has the one that
time.
started already?
Okay.
Okay, I'm good.
I'm good. You good? Cool. We're in the midst of race war, 21st wave of xenophobia, race racist hate is extorted order the modernity that re-embody the inheritance of 1619 manifest actually direct. Commercial cells and foreign military cells of arms are forged in internal debate over the expansion of white humanity and all its hypocrisy. The global promise of white being determines the coordinates of an always unfolding vine is already steeped in an edifice of accessibility. Narratives of racial progress ignore the pre-established template for progress that's inextricably tied to white humanity. Reforms are encapsulated within the order fluctuating between waves and retreats and white supremacy is the backdrop of the establishment of statecraft is the theater of racial nation building with facilitating movements and subtitles post-civil rights, multiculturalism, research and white nationalism, post-racial liberalism, law and order, the war on drugs, the war on terror, and infrastructure of tolerance and repression. They're never finally separable. The race war is inseparable from logistics, the code of modernity that move sociopathic demands, the era of the code sanctioned killing of black and brown bodies. Modern logistics is commercial logistics. First global movement of commodities required algorithmic regulation, arrangement of bodies and movement so as to secure financialization that we witness today in arms sales policy. The code sutures itself a kind of war calling upon the perversive nature of policy as a means of sanitized, touch horny, modern logistics, commercial logistics, even today's military logistics, mode economy, outsourced commercial firms who make a huge profit of logistics, contemporary pragmatic war. The Atlantic slave trade was the birth of modern logistics, a new kind of war on the human species and racial capitalism, the trade and entitled enough of global movement of mass commodities, finance, and logistics are trying to the global shipping industry. The story of the song is central. Modern logistics not about sociopathic demand for topographical, jurisdictional, bodily, and social access. Modern logistics is about controlling the flow and ensuring the flow. As much about the interface of the movements of commodities and finance, the elimination of goods of cargo from when the price of also consideration of finance of the song. The slave has the worker on the line and at the same the supply coming off the line and into the line. Our entanglement requires them to make our interpretation more contingent. Logistics will always be the white science of the science of white being. The race war is not just out there but in here. Debate is a microcosm of the race war. Their so-called neutrality of fairness, predictability, stasis, clash, and topic education are ideological means of entry in which the protocols are not a negotiation of competing models but predetermined by logistics of white being that seeks to fix those that need to be fixed. Limits are not just limits on the topic but practices of the community. Clashes, debates, and refusal to invite certain teams to round robins, policing and following around black and people of color debaters because their arguments are unsafe. Black debaters getting the cops called on them because their music is too loud. All prove the uniqueness question of the race war and the inseparability of the internal debate from debate as an activity. White logistics in the race war have encroached upon linguistic commons to the point where even thoughts themselves are quantifiable and financialized. Wired around the psychic drive of anti-blackness, the mode of governance is internalized and replicated as a violent practice of the race war. But as ubiquitous as the system sounds, it's always vulnerable to system glitch. Neural findings that are never supposed to happen in a movement that cannot be expropriated. Bellard and 70 the cognitive linguistic have undergone colonial expropriations. This overlaps with the violation of the slave trade. These encroachments on the linguistic commons with the level of technical saturation percent the political has been lost. What can political mean in a world characterized by algorithmic governance and platforms? Often the expropriation of cognitive linguistic by capital reduces discourse and production of the to the machine. Inequality sedimented to the machine's operational injustice to produce and reproduce a planetary culture founded upon racism. Machines can be understood racial formation, sexualities, positive in the program and series of accumulation. Strategies operating through everyday consciousness to thought render quantifiable, computable, and programmable. However, it's a mistake to imagine the impact that technology flows only in one direction. Technical forms of the dialect of domination struggle from the way that the purpose of like domination persists in living racialization, part and parcel of corporal inception. The code works us and we work the code. This is how both micro and macro levels of struggle in organization. There's no existing political discourse and approach arise, and current concepts of thought itself are fully circumscribed. Ideas themselves have become operational, fully functional. The matrix of information, the works that turns to basic colonizes neural, mental, central, and neural process while submitting themselves to interpretable regimes of finance and everyday life. Everyone is forced to continuously throughput information in order to manage vitality and risk. We are dealing with the overcutting of bodies and practices, the absorption of political energy by the strategies of accumulation. Politics and policy are always, today, always on the side of the state, and the state is the side of capital. The adjudication of this internal debate is no different than the logistical enforcement of arms sales policy as a corrective. But in this blur is the possibility of a horizon, one that problematizes the need for policy, one that is misimagined and disimagined imagined echo that asks the question, what would happen if the fleeting moment of anti-state terror were socialized against its dead congruence? Thus, we affirm military preservation as a reduction of direct commercial sales and foreign military sales of arms from the United States. As Bella reminds us, it is a mistake to imagine that logistics flows in only one direction. Military preservation is the unsettling feeling of the opposite flow, one that begins at the moment of sociopoiesis, the harness of energy, the sociality against the perversive fixation of policy, refuses the violent corrective and violent touch of white being in favor of a new feeling, a haptic relationality where we open ourselves to the possibility of possibilities, one where we gather dispossessed feelings of common as we undercommon, the capacity to feel through others, for others to feel through you, for you to feel them feeling you. This is the feel of insurgent, a feel that refuses to be regulated under jurisdictional doctrines of DCS and FMS that dictate the race war and its practices. The fugitive feeling of endurance felt by those in the hold of the horror of the first logistical cell. It's the reimagination institutionality by Southeast Asian potty states who gathered and wandered the refuge within each other, becoming ungovernable. This is the sapping of individuation that happens via the forceful imposition of arms sales policy without understanding policy as a corrective. It is the incompleteness of our apolitical project that inclines us towards one another. This is the apositionality being together, yet against the very institutions that seek political and logistical control. This moment and 16 a performative event repeated with nature. It can be a rupture. Institutionality works to undo demonstration, logic, individualizing, and their will to fix us. Sociality is resistance. Policy is the name for the form of political control. Command takes this, deputizes this part form of command which controls also reproduction by diagnosing incorrectness for those that represent need to be improved. Mode and Harney counterpoints plan and policy begins with the military preservation to escape the procedural sum of policy. Mode and Harney offer the sociopaths opposed of the statement. There's nothing wrong with us. Logistics counties bodies, objects, affects, information to logistics. Harney mode counterpoints hapticality to love, the capacity to feel through others, for others to feel through you, for you to feel them feeling you. Local imagination as a term for the non-place of abolition to beneath and beyond the university, inhabited by maroons, castaways, and fugitives, and a position on being together that renews our sense of institutions and society with the form and appearance of social being and collectivity is driven through social action and contest. Institutionality can be made and intuitively empower us to inhabit social being, otherwise reminding us that radical change requires structure. What does it mean to be militant? Shakaitis and Graeber tell us it's the imminent process of resistance, one that is a source for social insurgency among the people who refuse to be passive victims of or willing participants in an oppressive system. The requirement that in the midst of the race war and logistics we have no choice but to analyze, strategize, and act on their surrounding social conditions. Movements are not just abstractions or overlaying circuit points on the global sphere, but ongoing resistance that happen in our thoughts, action, provocation, and explorations. Our model debate seeks to extend towards new levels of understanding an imminent process of resistance that unleash beautiful insurgencies from the ground up. This is work without a beginning, without an end, and concept of planning as opposed to policy that we take with us wherever we go. Shakaitis and Graeber 7 investigation, social research, spend possibility of political action. The work of military investigations, multiple extending and tactics to new levels of understanding. Military investigation discovers new possibility of the present, turning dead ends into a joyful uncertainty. Holloway helped compile a book on the essays on the Zapatistas. When we normally read, the beginning is not the word, but the screen fades with the mutilation of human lives. Theoretical reflection of opposition, negativity, struggling from the rage that is born in libertarian struggle, the ultimate struggle against ideas, true revolutionary knowledge would have to be a pragmatic form of knowledge that lays the barrier for all pretension, deeply embedded in the logic of transformation, repetitive fears, debates ensued in Latin America, arguments about the very particular questions of revolutionary strategy. Who has a better model, Zapatistas or Chavez? Bolivarian revolution. The role of the ballot is to abolish the white debate committee. White spaces are a meaningful contradiction, seeking to organize without just embracing what they disown. Meaningful cross-racial affinity can only be found in moments of revolution, violence, and self-defense. Harney and 17 our enemies have not been saved by fashion, by democracy. Meaningful cross-racial affinity can be found in moments of revolution, violence, and not for pacifism, for self-defense. Solidarity with blackness means that someone is indicating now she or he not wants to join not in common struggles but in struggle. Blackness, a white community, is a contradiction. The only thing you can do is to abolish a community. Is anti-community, undercommon people who present as white are not allies. They have no place which to show this unless they embrace blackness. Whiteness is either absence of violence, and white people have a big role to play in revolution violence.
Yeah. Wait. Okay. First question, what's the AF's theorization of anti-black violence?
We think it operates through logistics. It's a process of containerization that has bodies and bodies and containerizes capital. We think that works through the code. The Beller evidence substantiates this and says that anti-blackness is no longer a function of like material institutions, but rather has become a neuronal process.
And this is
it's an argument about like brain chemistry.
Well, it's more than just brain chemistry. It's that the way that modernity has been founded itself has infiltrated those cognitive linguistic processes instilled within institutions. So it's like a larger system of logistics within which, like, you know.
So a system of logistics has altered our brain chemistry and the language in such a way that blackness is
it's not just
reinforced?
chemistry, like literal composition of the brain, but logistics predetermines the way sociality itself socially conditions people. So your arguments about like the social conditions are a prerequisite to those institutions is that logistics controls those social conditions, which means that at the level of form, only sort of interpersonal relations solve, and we think that is the only thing that can disrupt the code itself.
I'm not sure I follow that, and perhaps that stems from like misunderstanding what you mean by logistics.
Okay, so logistics, I'll explain it. 2 parts of logistics. One is, the first part is the individuation part. It's that logistics is a system that seeks to individuate the subject. It says that there's a broader goal, a sort of broader global aspect in which we are all a part of. This is substantiated by the last card that says that when there are common liberatory struggles, that's bad because it says that we're all working for something without realizing there are unique forms of violence, that we should not be working for sort of a telos, an end goal, but we should be working for each other. Mon and Harney say that this is a process of being in debt. There's a difference between debt and credit. It says that credit is a form of payment that can be recuperated, but debt is that there is no end to debt, and we should always
Okay,
debt each
so
other.
basically the conclusion is that violence is personalized as opposed to
Well,
collective.
it's sort of at a micro level, which means that macro political solutions can change
Okay,
the
actually, I
structures.
probably need to
but
move
cannot-
on.
Yeah,
The
sure.
implication of your theory of logistics is what for politics?
That the race war is inevitable.
The race war is inevitable, so why is that a good idea?
Because it's key for black and brown students to endure the race war.
So it's a strategy of coping
Endurance. I don't
Okay,
know
what do
you mean
people
by
do?
coping.
to
Uh,
cope.
We've
Well,
given a couple of different examples
think
of
that-
what military motivation could be.
Yeah, so first, before the examples, we think it's a question of social energy. We said the process of individuation and the code itself.
Okay, what does that have to do to boost energy?
Well, it traces the code, which stops the process of individuation.
So that part of the race war is not inevitable.
Wait,
The process of individuation?
in sort of like local spaces, no. So we think at an individual level that is not.
When we say the race war inevitable, we're like people are going to be anti-black.
racist. So there will always be the other side. We're not trying to convince the other side that they should stop their practices.
Our argument is that
Okay,
we can
that makes
resist
sense.
unification. Yeah.
Golden season. The order is 2 off, and then case.
Give me a second.
Sure.
I have.
You got it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you said you didn't get it.
No.
My bad. Alright. Anyone not ready? Interventionally affirmed to defend the United States federal government substantially reducing foreign military sales or direct commercial sales of arms from the United States and resolved into policy Lewis and House 5. Resolution of legislative instrument for policies in the United States should means the debate is solely about the outcome of a policy established by governmental means. Excellent 3. Each topic contains key elements and agent of the United States. Second, the purpose that urges action should adopt means to put a policy into action through governmental means. The entire debate is about whether something ought to occur. And topicality is a voting issue. First is prep and clash. Post-facto topic changes alters the balance of prep, which structurally favors the app because they speak last and use terms key to engage in a well-prepared opponent. And second is limits. Specific topics are key to reasonable expectations for 2 ends. Open subjects allow teams to simply defend there's language choice, creating incentives for avoidance that overstretches the negative in terms of participation and or interpretation is the only way to learn the skills of subversion and sabotage. Speaking the language, the power allows to imagine ways to redirect state policy against itself and avert environmental disaster and Western imperialism. The imaginary is also good for macro political spaces because it helps us identify weak points in hegemonic institutions. The Delano 12. Infiltration and operating behind enemy lines and infiltration to be taken when think about operating within current institutional realities. Attacks have been originally environmental disaster, economic collapse, and ecological alienation, imperial aggression, and connected by the West. Under these conditions, that these resistance needs to be conceptualized. Dated narratives and revolutionary struggle are no longer viable. There's no guarantee of a happy ending. Although these narratives may provide comfort, they are not open up alternative possibilities of resistance. This does not mean that we should resign ourselves to the tongues of nihilistic defeat, as there is a potential for radical hope within the cracks of the empire state agencies. Infiltrated radical political movements should think about assuming the same tactic using infiltration as a way to think about practice within institutional realities and these forms of sabotage infiltration can be a theoretical framework around illustrate our practice, looking for cracks and opportunities to sabotage dominant protecting sections of the world that demonstrate another world is possible. Offensive realities should not politicize into intellectual in the clouds with the conversation about the world and nodding our heads in agreement rather than challenging our practices with the alternative voice and tactics essentially to be the basis of radical reflection about what we are actually doing, such as political organization, co-option, or challenges we will face, but should not stop us from doing something. And strategies of sabotage are not political hope or reformism. Learning the ability of trickery and sabotage in our daily life enables coping in an anti-black world. Only engaging institutions by speaking their language can do this. Sullivan 17. Black communities need to increase the number of types of tool in the racial justice toolkit. I argue pragmatism on racial realism to develop all strategies in addressing anti-black racism. The result is black people will have new strategies for flourishing in an anti-black world if they don't have a political struggle to eliminate racism. Coping does not mean surrendering or merely getting by as communities that cope pragmatically understand the value of things as in their effects, including whether they can be enable flourishing. Successfully fighting white racism involves appeal to the predictable self-interest of whites and realizing that the collusion of white people. Bell argues that black people need to be like a bear rabbit who chased bear fox into setting him free by convincing the fox that the rabbit into the wire patch is the worst thing that the fox would ever do. The fox acts like what he thinks is in his own best interest, and in doing so he does the very thing that enables bear rabbit to escape a masterful tactic to manipulating and ruins bear rabbit doesn't rely on the law. He is ruthlessly realistic about the malicious self-interest that motivates the fox, and for that reason he is able to devise an effective strategy for getting out. And switching sides on an agreed upon topic enables self-reflexive openness that prevents dogmatism and enables sabotage, and that makes sabotage impossible. Screen it, Ivan 17. Deliberation pushes people to be open, and deliberation induces individuals to reflect on their preferences, becoming amenable to changing in light of persuasion for instance, they are ensured to put themselves in other shoes. These changes require being open to other perspectives. Participants may still hold belief views on what policy would be best, and a pessimistic combination of openness does not require consistency of beliefs between multiple agents or in a group of strong value-based friends. There are bills opposed by people without a shared base value, and the discussion will lead to automatic assertion. The stronger individuals' opinions, the less willing they are to relax their opinion and be open. And this is offense against the one I see the state has and will use tactics of infiltration against revolutionary movements. We should practice assuming the tactics of subversion against the state to both subvert the state itself and identify when the state agents are attempting to subvert us. Chapter 17. Tactics that make us feel good because they are auxiliary, not other same as effective tactics. They can be precisely the opposite. The state has turned political juju, whether by the left action may be turned around and used to strengthen the right. The propagateur has sinister mission. The propagateur into reverse actions that which have the Emory into acts that will release the runs and lock them by the Germany Council. The FBI and agents of the propagateurs and organization with the purpose of dividing, disrupting, discrediting them. The civil rights movement, the ruling class, develop covert strategies for undermining the new radicalism, the agent provocateurs, concentrating on testing and revolutionary human acts that would divide the movement while landing them in jail, disrupting the highly effective American people movement, practice of presiding the purchase during the Iraq War and occupied. This manipulation still continues. And next off, their theory of black relationality is rooted in negative identity, which ensures endless rejection and forecloses political change. Brown 95. Reaction is impotence of substitute for action. The reading describes powerlessness. Resentment itself is rooted in reaction. Identity is a reaction from the outside. Must become you. While the revenge is achieved, retirement of suffering as the measure of social virtue and a privilege. Self-reclaiming identity becomes invested in its own subjection. That's what lines in. And the satisfaction of revenge, which increases the marginalization, politicized identity, premised on exclusion, seek generalized political failure, and capitalism causes war, violence, environmental destruction, and extinction. Robinson 16. Global capitalism turned inequality into an attraction, lays return war, and structural violence and inequality into opportunities for capital, social polarization, potentials reach explosive dimensions. Top 1% owns more than 99% of inequalities, full stagnation. They average the loyalty of that 20%, while confidence in the room passing there as the social control and through corporate marketing that depoliticize the consumers' fantasies and extreme inequality regards extreme violence. The system is originally illogical limits of environmental and just refer to planetary boundaries of capital imposed to humiliate profit. It is difficult to imagine that environmental catastrophe can be resolved. Green capitalism, oxymoron, warfare and police can even normalize the limits of expansion and toward militarized accumulation, making wars of endless destruction. And resolution must involve redistribution of income, and the alternative is to build solidarity around a mass socialist movement. Does they can read 15. We must start by exercising the impulse toward utopian dreaming that should provide space for a strategic discussion of mass socialist movement based on new institutions mobilizing cross-class solidarity, broad movement, building a class mobilizing around an agenda of anti-capitalist reforms that set the priority of the social needs of the partner forces and circles to expand institutions like housing, transportation, healthcare, and education could create a new popular constituency for a revitalized movement and models are successful when they can leverage existing power to build outwards a strategic organizing leverage, building opportunities to build power for working people focused on the control of global capitalism. And next, in case. Political change is possible, worthwhile, and requires specific targeted political strategies. Spence 15. At a moment when all seemed thought radical political action exists in Jackson, Mississippi, about Heath, organizing a British Maryland, and legislature held prison, the Democratic grassroots movement made electing a component of the organizing the CDU, hold a meeting, I did for people, always political officials, neoliberalizing education, and Black Lives Matter, organized politics was at the center of the struggle for progress, and we should never ignore the fundamental role politics plays when people do not come to a common understanding of structural dynamics and what solution would be to being exposed to loving without having this space to offer the issues that have the long-term mobilizing and let's go under the burden. Will not cause people to organize themselves. The process is not enough without articulating what the new world would look like, what policies would result, what the benefits would be. And progress is not only possible, it has consistently occurred since the dawn of the 20th century. Prefer overwhelming statistical evidence. Figure 18. This is the nature of progress that it is champions face out of the major remaining injustice and forget how far we have come. We can live in a deeply racist, sexist, and homophobic society, like other forms of progress. Will be the denial of advances has been embedded by sensational headlines. For the recent events of the universe where Donald Trump was the beneficiary of literal system, the view research center has pro-Americans' opinion on race, gender, and sexual orientation. It has reported that these strategies have undergone a fundamental shift toward tolerance with prejudices looking into oblivion. Each generational cohort is more likely than the one before. It has massive data on the strengths that people such researchers correlate with private racism, turns against Americans and artists and more about confessing they probably don't find it amusing. These probably underestimate the decline because of who's Googling Trump's success is better understood and the mobilization of it achieved and is ranking demographic than the sudden reversal of a century long movement of African Americans. The poverty rate fell from 55% to 27.6. Life expectancy rose from 33 to 75.6. Literacy fell from 45 to effectively zero. Racial gap in schools been shrinking. So as the gap in happiness rates once a regular turns and night rates and lynchings plummeted in the 20th century. And there's no trade-off between fighting violence at home or abroad. Rather, imperialist violence is constitutive and interconnected. Euro 14. Recent killing of the Michael Brown has been made visible how racism and manifests dominating American life policies have been turned into social. I think it is mistaken to simply focus on the militarization of the peace. What are we witnessing the brutal killing of mobilization of state lines and a symptomatic of the neoliberal racist pushing state working all over the world with its encouraging machinery of the social that it is virtually wrong to talk about the militarization of a local peaceful races without recognizing global politics in which public spheres have been replaced by militarization of the entire society. The impact of the rapid militarization of local police forces and of poor black communities is symptomatic of the violence that takes place in advanced universal states. The events and breakings speak to a history of representation of abroad that Americans have chosen to forget at their own risk and I'm good for cross-legs.
You good?
Yep.
Cool. Can political reform eliminate racism?
I mean, we would take issue with the word eliminate, but we think it can mitigate it.
Okay.
So it can eliminate it in certain contexts.
Okay, cool. I'm going to give you a chance. The Sullivan evidence cites Derek Bell's conception of IR. What do you think that Bell's vision of IR is?
I mean, we don't think that's relevant to the claim that we made in the context of the Sullivan evidence.
You've highlighted Bell. I argue pragmatists draw on racial realism to develop alternative strategies. The rest of the card goes on to say Bell's conception of racial realism is good. So I'm going to give you a chance. What is racial realism?
We have answers to this claim in the context of the Sullivan evidence. The Sullivan evidence is actually not endorsing the theory outright, but instead is actually advocating that people play upon this notion and leverage it against racists.
I'm just asking, what do you think racial realism is?
We think that it is a relative... I can't lay out the theory in depth because I haven't studied it specifically, but we know it's problematic and is what Sullivan is problematizing in the card.
Racial realism is that Derek Bell says we should fuck the state, we should not endorse any sort of IR, but I'll move on. Sprain and Ivik, why should we switch sides to the other side of the race war?
We think that we should at least switch sides in the context of people who are critical of your approach to fighting the race war.
But why should we endorse the other side of the race war?
We don't think you should necessarily endorse the people that are propagating racist violence, but we think in the context of this debate, there are people who think that institutional reforms can be productive. We think you should embrace their side of it.
Cool. The Shepherd's evidence says that revolutionary movements get cracked down upon. Why?
Because the state infiltrates them.
Okay. The first card you read on case is political change is possible, cites grassroots movements, says those are good. Why do they not get cracked down?
They've made minor changes. We think that they are not sufficient to actually effectuate a change in institutional politics.
You've read evidence that movements that engage the political get cracked down.
They've made contingent progress in certain instances.
Why do movements...
But we're talking about radical revolutionary movements that actually
Why do those Trump and the government, the FBI would hate those even more? Why do those not?
The Spence evidence is in the context of contingent institutional engagement within democratic governance.
These are all grassroots movements. Every single one is bottom up.
But they're in the context of specific targeted changes to current institutional reality.
So just because we specify which institution we want to change, the government's like, wait, no, actually you're good.
So anarchist movements are the sort that get the really radical politics are the sort that get infiltrated by the FBI.
Only anarchist movements get cracked down. Okay, that's cool. The De Leon evidence, what do you think the conclusion is?
I'm sorry?
The De Leon evidence, what do you think he defines infiltration as?
We think that infiltration, in the context of the De Leon evidence, is about working within the state and existing institutions and using the leverage,
So you think De Leon concludes that you should use the language of power?
Yeah.
Cool. 8. Oh, just kidding.
I'll say that. Just a second, you pass me stand. Case, cap, teeth, Everyone good? Cool. Vote affirmative for a politics and motor preservation that traces the logistical code of DCSFMS and revitalizes sociality as a neural blockage that stops the process of individuation to endure the ongoing race towards a motive mutual indebtedness against a white institutional violence similar to the field of the holder South Asian party states, but oriented as a blockage of the logistical system. The discussions of DCSFMS are framed with a uniqueness question makes the app triad. The race wars here happening at the alt-right Ferguson extrajudicial killings, anti-black debate practices like black debate the cops caught in the clashes. The nature of our was striking of black is all proved. The role of the battle so lost to white debate community cross-racial affinity can only be found in our mutual indebtedness to blackness and modern hardy evidence. The first spends evidence. One, whiteness is an order of random institutions. It operates insurgents and retreats. One, Rodriguez index their authors particular examples of progressive reforms because they're always hostile with a surge of violence, slavery to Jim Crow to prison industrial complex. Second, we have a theory of logistics. One, as the violence has transitioned to the era of the code instilled within our cognitive linguistic functions. Institutional reform reorients the code that expands the code, but the formation of the algorithm itself is based off of expropriated communicative racial lines. Third, we've reimagined institutions based on ungovernable sociality, i.e. the party states all argument those immediate evidence forces the double turn with their framework arguments that state that their stage cracks down on these movements, which proves uniqueness for the F. The pink evidence is the regions that reject the team. He's an alt-right adjacent monster who bases most of his claims about declining violence on intentionally cherry-picking statistics to justify neo-reactionary policies. For example, he's a literal rape apologist who claimed reports of rape were over-reported and statistical violence were fabricated by advocacy groups. Also violent and racist. Macaulay in 18 there's significant social absence of pinkers' views that subject of mass race. These pinkers were very with the no really Western looking contrast in from a Western country. Pinker and Anglos human violence associated with imperialism wars in Africa, South America, and Asia. Figured very little he was on the idea of the long PCs that are unfamiliar with colonial subjects that were killed in Australia, Afghanistan, China, the Falklands, India, Jamaica, Kenya, New Zealand, South Africa, and Queen Victoria's was a typing revolution that Russian civil war is only passing much of the Russian civil war to be the bloodiest of the 70s typing resulted in the 30 million that's leading to linked to systematic rebellion and imperial violence that are under appraisal of indigeneity. Mark the card at indigeneity. The juror argument that was wrong. One, is misdiagnosed as a binary, even if there are international and domestic interconnections. Our argument is specific to understanding how violence operates intimately. That was the individuation argument that was already explained about i.e. our focus on violence out there trades off with our discussions of the way in which intimate violence happens in spaces like debate, i.e. how when we think about cops as out there, we somehow forget how sometimes we are the cops, we are the ones that are policing in the first place. Cap. Case outweighs the race war fracture socialist organizing because it ensures your purity politics reformulate whiteness and continues to wage war against black and brown communities. Capitalism can't explain how bodies are overcoded by race or overkill operates, how intimate violence happens in spaces like debate. The one I see is an update to their theory. Logistics is the newest wave of capitalism that containerizes and privatizes Africa. It's no longer a question of being alienated from the means of production with the means of social reproduction, which is something only the Africans saw permutation do, but the parties never have to. Party the Chamberlain in 18 hour party was the new Communist Party. The party so decided our future side of revolutionary plans so in the course of we the founded the Communist Party historical communities we believe with the beginning difference in the different forms of our party was the death to the black radical churches, black radical churches acquire house party political parties endured through coercion violence. Forces that I mean our communist parties and they for others who will change of events reform into being a plurality of broken people who are trying to keep each other alive and to be a connection for members of queer society and comes to life is now but the constant of zero and other roads to blush and brown people in the midst of the country racially implicated being with each other was being with you in the wake of that we get common to each other we became communist vertical organizing and absent racial ethics are bad based on movement colorblind so racial ethics which always puts black and brown bodies on the back burner. Revolutionary intercommunalism is amazing and a link filter that's not and 17. Our basic problems is educating, organizing, Trump's repository supply way to wages of whiteness through racism, nationalism, xenophobia, wages of whiteness with class unity along racial lines, love and return to the settlement between labor and capital failed to see how liberalism was racist and different socialism split humanity across the color line, revolutionary communism, the national setup is only a global form of discipline to suffice and offer revolutionary redistribution with on regional communal revolutionary communism the alliance with the other social movement. The aim was not only united front against global clouds, but also to create reduction force of life. No impact. Extinction is now not 2050 for black and brown bodies, police and multi spots, land occupation, gentrification, surveillance, all the race war comes first. Race war causes extinction, that's acne. And 7, the shift has to be a culture shift, not an economic one, not social ruptures. You have a human being, human is problem, sociological cancers, and troubles with the environment, global warming, distribution of world resources remains the status quo. The territory of the are present as no class and what we over the human is enacted by our disciples. It is our first and but was to meet human, they became down, and now we quit with the Western world and mode. Look at the mutation and the new relation with the nature would lead to rising capitalism. It is not first and foremost but a production capitalism that controls us the far. The process of function domestic first discussively instituted the economic consumption with the human economic apparatus function not the other way around. We can see that because we are with the back of the model of being and conceiving of the human to get outside. We don't see how it works. The alternative one, there's a sociopathic descent. The smoothing of transition of capitalism to communism is the logistics of modernity that comes at the expense of harvesting illicit under common labor that necessitates input of black life to sustain the system because blackness is the assembly line of logistical production that you want to see harney of there's no accountability descent. There's no accountability mechanism in the party that prevents instances of anti-black and anti-queer violence, which is an independent reason of rejection because the intimate violence gets recreated. There's a suspended futurity descent. Their model forces a suspended futurity that's Sullivan and study black Americans you just expanding liberal for this. It functions as cruel happens with episodes of health sciences that black homes, the image of psychosomatic health structure flourishing in the anti-black world. Racial battle fatigue has been linked empirically to depression, jealousy, anxiety disorder, African Americans, higher hypertension, cardiovascular disease, with mortality. These effects more can be transformational expropriation is that their alternative fails to account for the ways in which capitalism extracts value beyond exploitation, leaving the lumpen proletariat behind us rank. And these racial legacies have rendered black residents lootable or articulate to police opposition of black people's global accumulation, the capitalist cycle, low cost exploitation, expropriation, but one makes the other possible. There is assumption of those whom capital expropriation is a conditional possibility for the agreement with those who might exploit free workers and global capitalism as their power for which an expropriation concept is contractual between the present regime of racial accumulation, financialized capitalism, and not only traditional subject, but also those who were previously treated by the status of citizen workers. If expropriation exploitation now caused on the made it possible by the probability of bringing subjects on the according to risk framework.
Debate is not a game but a microcosm of the race war. Their move to procedurals upholds the internal debate, white being that acts as a corrective to reinstantiate its protocols, put procedurals on hold in the race war because competitive protocols can't be divorced from the social motorization of debate itself. Form is content. The Beller evidence says the cognitive linguistic has been suffocated by an algorithmic mode of governance which necessitates a harvest of life, proves the ballot warrant because it shows the neurological rewiring that reprograms everyday consciousness towards sociality, which also is a spill out dissent. Their model results in psychic burnout that saves off Milton potentiality in favor of maximizing logistical clash and procedures. Counter-interp absence defending Milton. Reading of the resolution 1AC, Shakaitis defines this as anti-logistical social insurgency, which has forces affirmatives to defend Milton's strategies to fight the race war under which DCS FMS have been framed. We flip the scripts for functional limits. It's no longer policy but planning. Limits as planning as how we develop affect into politics. We use the side of our policies away from logistics. Preferred one is Milton's skills. Shakaitis says that debates over resistance strategies are key for those living through the race war because that's the only predictable debate is over the race war. Only our model allows for comparison between CP, BPP, and Sapotesis, which generates skills and energy to fight the race war and solves their second and third level true testing arguments. Second is that their vision of a predictable stasis point is not neutral negotiation but presumptive of assumptions under their terms of debate, i.e. the demand for fiat even with the lack of resolutional basis upholds the protocols of the race war. Dissats to their model. First is pacification. Their disavowal of the internal debate in favor of the American polity as the frame for debates pacifies militancy as insurrection politics, which gives into whiteness and its demands. Which side forces oppositionality and not apositionality, which is what YC Milan describes as the only way to imagine militant preservation as sociopoiesis. Second is an individuation decide their focus on US as we should pauses our political protest as complete, which allows logistics to infiltrate and individuate our embodied affect and forces us to submit to coercive power. When we start with the presumption of violence out there, we never audition violence in here, which is the only way to trace our psychic investments. Third is that their call for stasis in a moment of crisis, the equilibrium. That's Kelsey. And 19. Their living crisis for the Indian polity strives to desire for return to normalcy and civility of to reading debate rather than making debate rating. And we think that the coordinates that's the reason that dialectical agnostic conversation must one have a presupposed potentiality for common ground. Refusing this to self and wants to work accurately. Think of the rhetoric as a presupposition of ground of war against the anti-blackness that debate is impossible to against a war on the horizon and disorganized the state of emergency. We are threatened with racial civil war. The TV is not competitive or responsible to what debate could look like, not what debate has to look like, which means that it doesn't resolve our offense about only Milton skills. Now, fairness is just an internal, like if I win our research model is the best way to generate Milton skills, and you vote. If no fairness in race war, their move maximizes the status quo. That's Wilderson. And 18, the level most comfortable for white people, fair play. The rules apply to everyone. Reproducing concepts like fairness, hard norms, harmony between the races. How can we maintain maximum order with the minimum amount of change while presenting ourselves to confidence over which institutional reform is better? Promising supposed to keep saying antagonisms that every black body doesn't love the things you love is a threat to your fantasy space. Passive revolutions have a way of incorporating black and white bodies to either terms of the debate. The idea testing arguments exclusion turns and mercilessly exclude micropolitical strategies means that they lead to a wide echo chamber. Their skills get co-opted by statism, which turns their endpoint of their testing debate to the side of ideological warfare that's healthier and heights 18. The academy regulars who can participate in dialogue at a project applicable to service liberal policy superficial inclusion clips dialogue are frequently looking up to your life engagement. We should be trying for something more radical than dialogue. The materiality of I already have that. The material of intellectual inquiry refutes course with the source of black scholarship and the necessity of politics engagement. We reject pressures of the academy and generation black scholars have card out space even when they're not formally off the seat of the table and work the card at table. The daily evidence it flows out. Daily is an anarchist who says that we should destroy the state, but their intro doesn't teach tactical infiltration unless it's compromised on the process of individuation, and it also causes things like crackdown because De Leon is literally an anarchist, which was one of the crossings proven by their reading of the Sullivan evidence. Their tactics of infiltration contradicts with the highlighting of the Sullivan evidence because A, we need to divest political hope, and B, rely on the law, and C, tricks white people, none of which their interpretation, thus is Shepard's evidence, is tactical. The tactics argument is terrible and impact turn on case. These sorts of violence are inevitable and point to particularities diverse energy from fighting the race war. Only our model develops social energy and the right infiltration tactics without compromising on anti-black violence. They are wrong about Sullivan. It's not Derek Bell's vision of racial realism that says fuck the political. Their cutting with Sullivan has quotes like black students should quote no longer hope that their political struggle will eliminate racism, which proves our argument.
Alright, good.
Yeah. Wait, give me 1 second.
We're gonna take. Okay, 357. Or 757. 37.
Okay. Good? Perfect. So reasons to drag the team, just the thinker stuff?
Mhm.
Okay. The T-flow?
Yeah.
What is the argument for the counter-inter?
Our counter-interpretation is that affirmatives must define a militant reading of the resolution. There's a great section in the 1AC where we define what it means to be militant. We think that it's a form of anti-logistical social insurgency in the context of deliberation over DCS FMS. I don't want to reread the 1AC, but
that's fine.
reference our definition of
Okay,
militant,
so
which
after
we
the
think provides stable
counter-interpretation,
ground. Yeah?
you have like a no fairness argument, right?
Yeah, there's a no fairness argument.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. So we've made uniqueness claims about how the race war has infiltrated spaces like debate and is kind of intricate and intertwined within the way in which the game functions. Our argument is if we win the game is the race war, then fairness upholds the game, which is why fairness is bad during the race war. Another reason why fairness is bad during the race war is because it puts procedurals over the way in which individual intimate violence happens in spaces like debate, which we think that we should prioritize.
Okay. It's fine. The next argument after that is the Delaney argument, right?
The De Leon stuff, yeah.
The De Leon stuff.
Yes.
Why does it flow out?
De Leon evidence, the author is an anarchist.
The article title is Anarchism Behind Enemy Lines. The explanation in 1NC Cross-X was that anything that is anarchy would
It will get cracked down on, which means that...
Or it means that your model of debate, saying that the USFG should, does not teach anarchy behind enemy lines. The example that De Leon cites is when a bunch of workers stole uniforms of the state, wore those uniforms, then infiltrated the movement, decided that they cleared their community of like what they called the plague, and then left it alone and
Also,
disengaged
like, another
from the
thing is,
state.
like,
I didn't move on.
Yeah, sure.
So you have A, B, and C points after that? What are those?
Oh, yeah, sure. A point is that, it's just like, Sullivan says, A, we need to divest political hope, which isn't your interp. B, it says that we shouldn't rely on the law, which also isn't your interp. And C, it says that we need to trick white people, none of which your interpretation does.
Like, your interp doesn't force sabotage. Like, yes, it
Why
could
not?
be the result of your interp, but it does not
Also, like,
force
sabotage skills, like Westman just saying, oh, we fiat, without actually talking about sabotage skills proves how
So-
you don't really inculcate them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the last argument on T.
There was also an argument about the Shepard's. Well, we also said that Sullivan is citing racial realism, and then the Shepard's evidence. We said the tactic stuff is impact turned on case, and then we also made arguments
And what was
about
the argument about like switch side debate?
So we made a couple arguments. One is like switch side bad during the race war because you should pick a side. Second is how the mean limit evidence says oppositionality is a bad frame to understand it. Rather, we should be apositional in the sense that we should be indebted to one another. Switch side forces oppositionality. Rather, we think should be a comparison of revolutionary strategies, not one versus reform.
Why is oppositionality bad?
Starts
mean
at
limits,
telos.
yeah, like, well, it's more than just starting at a telos, but mean limit says apositionality is the only way in which we can be indebted to one another, which is also the Harney evidence, the last one that was written in the 1AC about how moments of cross-racial indebtedness.
So okay, the argument after the perm is like vertical something bad.
Vertical.
It's just like vertical organizing ethics bad because they're colorblind.
I get it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you put it somewhere?
Yeah, hold on.
Do you get a new computer?
How do you run my old computer? It's so weird.
We've had you do it.
Actually, not as much this year.
Not this year,
Not
but
this
like,
year.
I still remember. here. Wait, can you finish it? Yeah, I can finish it. I'll just put it up here.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Let's use what pen do you use?
I'm sorry.
Which two? Nothing. Don't worry about it.
I'm sending it out. How do you take it over? Okay, 147. So it'll be T and then case.
Yes, sir. But
Is anyone ready? Our interpretation is that the affirmative team should endorse the hypothetical implementation of a topical advocacy. The first impact is fairness. Debate is a game, and all debate's benefits come from clash over a stable and predictable point of stasis. Their counter-interpretation breaks the game of debate by exposing the negative to a nearly infinite number of affirmatives or affirmative frameworks, which skews the balance of competitive equity too far in the direction of the affirmative. Competitive equity is a prior question because well-researched contestation is what makes debates distinct from monologue in academia. The second impact is the skills of subversion and sabotage. Engaging in in-depth debates over USG policy allows us to use debate as a training ground for tactics of infiltration. Our DOE evidence isolates 3 internal links. The first is institutional engagement. Infiltration requires working within the current institutional arrangement. Debating about this state is critical to wording the language of power, which allows us to identify the weak points of those institutions and allows us to identify the tactics of that state agents assume when they try to infiltrate radical movements. Second is predictable clash. We need to have well-prepared, in-depth debates over strategies of sabotage in order to test those strategies and build credible blueprints for political organization. Third is switch side debate. We have to switch sides frequently and defend arguments we don't believe to become better saboteurs. Sabotage requires being able to ardently argue and persuade people about things that you don't believe in. Debating the same thing every round makes it impossible to slip on a mask to trick and sabotage people. We have 2 impacts that outweigh. The modern state perpetuates environmental disasters, economic collapse, and endless imperial violence. Institutional resistance and sabotage are the only chance we have to exploit cracks in the institutions and create macro-political change. That's De Leon. Environmental disaster and Western imperialism outweigh the affirmative on scope, turns the affluently. Sabotage can fundamentally destroy surveillance policies and architectures that will inevitably be used to monitor black folks in any context. Second is micro-political sabotage. Learning to be duplicitous and slip on a mask in the day-to-day is important when confronted with inevitable realities of anti-black racism. The solvent evidence is phenomenal that strategies of trickery and sabotage against the government work and are crucial for coping with and creating conditions that allow for thriving in black communities. This is key internal link to actualizing the strategies of militant preservation by teaching us how to infiltrate the police or FBI and target executive power while preventing state entrapment and crackdown. There's a broad framing issue for all of their offense. You should filter topicality debates through models of debate. Even if you think the affirmative is a good idea or good use of time, they need to win why it needs exposure to negation to win that it's a good model for debate. Their first argument is debate is a microcosm. First, violence outside of debate outweighs. We agree that debate is a microcosm and that it's representative of broader institutional realities that are creating anti-black violence as well as other forms of imperial violence on a larger scale, which is why instead of becoming stuck in debate as a sort of political dead end, we should instead multiply the effect of our efforts by going and working in the macro political realm. Second, attempting to change debate within the competitive confines of a round is counterproductive. That's Atchison and Panetta 9. Dismissal of the resolution debaters has been counselors preparing for in the name of community problem debaters have little control over, does not help further goals. If each debater's decision about how debate community should approach a problem, losing debaters become collateral damage, does little generate the critical coalitions because competitive focus encourages teams to concentrate on how to beat the strategy. Serious change is more likely outside of a competitive debate discussion. The result from these is not a productive one where participants seek to work together. Specifically true for their affirmative. They can't resolve any of their examples of anti-black violence. The vast majority of the community members already agree that's bad, but the controversy isn't the problem, it's the solution, and they don't have a clear blueprint other than a bunch of polysyllabic words that no one ever bothers to understand after rounds. They say this algorithmic infiltration argument or the spill out dissent about psychic burnout. However, their model for resolving psychic burnout is less effective than ours. Low in 12. Self-care will include barriers to people without time to spare. It becomes a far-off dream. Organizing to create alternatives is the only option for how care could be anything but alien movement work. Is a healing collective effort is the highest articulation of caring for one's own self. Self-care can avoid structural barriers to make access to care impossible. The crisis of care is the crisis of organization. We try to nourish our hearts instead of creating collective space that unleashes our heart's creative desires. We can find endless wells to draw upon to usher it in. The problem with self-care is the underlying assumption that labor is draining, struggles for life-giving instead of energy-taking, and that evidence is specifically true. The idea that anti-blackness is inevitable, that there's nothing we could possibly do to remediate those to remediate those injustices, but instead that black debaters should just be forced to cope with those realities is the most demotivating and saps people of energy. They don't have specific recommendations for how people deal with anti-blackness within debate other than claiming that they have mapped it and not pointing towards a clear political or micro-political endpoint. In addition, we've link-turned both this and the debate as a microcosm argument with the extension of solve and above. They say the counter-interpretation, it solves none of our offense. First, doesn't solve sabotage. Our offense is about developing the institutional strategies with the counter-interpretation strategically foregoes. Second, half the topic is no topic, allows the affirmative to pick and choose which part of the resolution or arbitrary external frame for contestation they want to talk about. Given inevitable strategic incentives, the affirmative has to skirt negation. There will be a proliferation of affirmatives that are unpredictable and have only concessionary ground because they can't fiat their interpretation. Third, it's not predictable. Negative preparations predicate on the resolution as the only stable locus for prep. A bunch of ongoing phenomena could be described as predictable for all sorts of different debaters, but however, in the context of debate, the resolution is the best stasis. They say militant skills. There's no reason why they solve them best, but if comparing militant skills is something that can happen under their interpretation of debate, then you should also consider all of our sabotage offense as a dissad or as an alternative to their movement and a means for the negative to engage. However, their counter-interpretation, it doesn't uniquely access militant skills in a way that we have not, one that we access better vis-a-vis skills of sabotage and infiltration, which is the best strategy for effectuating change on the macro level because of infiltration, which is an argument that they have explicitly conceded for us. They say fiat's incapable of solving our offense and only serves to reify the race war. However, it doesn't assume the fact that the contestation within the rounds, about sabotage does not necessarily rely on fiat. It relies on affirming the normative desirability of a particular end. But in the context of the sabotage debates we've had, running affirmatives like the United States federal government should end its foreign military sales on the grounds that the United States is not a legitimate government. When we've had those debates, we've talked about spill-up strategies for potentially infiltrating institutions and laying out clear roadmaps for various individuals to take. So it's not necessarily the conventional mode of fiat that they are critiquing, but it's a more nuanced one in the context of sabotage and the normative model of debate that we're endorsing. They say switch side debate, that we should pick a side, perhaps, but we should also have a reasoned dialogue about what the best approach to our side of the race war is, which is necessarily something they foreclose. We shouldn't just stumble upon the first option that seems good. We should instead allow ourselves the right to be wrong and to make selections and discriminate between potentially better options. They say oppositionality. It sounds negative, but it's actually productive in the context of teasing out the best ideas in the debate space. There's no reason why it's necessarily negative or why we can't implement their more relational mode of politics outside of the context of individual rounds while weighing accessing the benefits. They say that out there in here distinction. I answer that in the debate as a microcosm argument, the equilibrium argument. It begs the question of who can solve the race war better. There's no unique offense here that isn't internally turned by all the work I've already done. They say the TVA, we don't think TVA specifically interacts with their offense on framework in the ways that most conventional TVAs do. However, we think that endorsing a model of debate where teams defend strategies of sabotage is a significantly better one for the reasons I've described above, and it could take a multitude of different forms in the context of the resolution that has been set forth. They say fairness is an internal linkage. That may be true in most contexts. However, in the context of the role of the judge, it is an a priori issue, and and one that you obviously inherently consider regardless of the debating that occurs in this round. They say that there should be no fairness. However, the solution to injustice is not taking fairness away from the rest. We've cut the Wilderson evidence wildly out of context. It's not making the broader case that they have tagged it to make. They say that we result in exclusion or an echo chamber. That's not true. In the context of debate, we allow for a multitude of different perspectives to come under our tent. They say that add and stir offense assumes T is a watered down version of their framework. Obviously, if they win, they're better. They'll win. Begs the question, and the switch side debate solves their arguments about De Leon being an anarchist or our point. But you can resist crackdown if you learn the strategies of sabotage, which was the Shepard's evidence. The social energy stuff was answered on the psychic burnout arguments before. Political hope being bad is the case for anarchism. However, the means by which we bring about anarchism and resolve macro-political violence is through sabotage, which is the point of all of our arguments. The pinker stuff will be answered in the webinar.
Cool. Do you have any questions?
I do not have any questions. So.
Cool. You good?
Yeah.
Okay. 1NC card. What card do you think substantiates that you solve environmental disaster?
I'm sorry?
1NC card, the De Leon
You're just
evidence.
asking which card has the internal link to environmental disaster?
Correct.
Yeah, so first it establishes the environmental disaster claim when it says cracks have emerged through environmental disaster, economic collapse, and then it concludes that infiltration is sufficient to solve that.
The card starts, cracks have been emerged through environmental disaster. Where do you think the conclusion is that sort of debating over these things results in solving?
I mean, it says a theoretical framework in which to situate our practice, always looking for cracks, weaknesses, and opportunities to sabotage dominant conceptions of the world that demonstrates another world is possible. It goes on
that
to
solves the
advocate for
environment
desirability.
and creates climate tech how?
Well, it solves for environmental destruction because the strategies of sabotage and infiltration can obviously be turned against fossil fuel companies.
So it's like they might be, they might not be. There's no definitive case. Like what's to say that your model of debate results in people like why does it only result in people who solve environmental disaster?
Well, we think that if we have debates and we resolve that environmental disaster is an important issue that ought
But
to be addressed through
if we're
sabotage.
switching sides, and why doesn't the negative just conclude like CO2 ag is good?
Well, because it's not good, and they will figure that out after just losing on it a bunch of times because the affirmative team has the better of the argument.
Okay, cool. The limits arguments are like the counterinterpretation doesn't solve sabotage. What about the interpretation was the affirmative should defend the United States federal government forces teams to read sabotage? Like, what prevents Aiden from reading the Taiwan app? What prevents
reading your app doesn't prevent Aiden from reading those
Well,
affirmatives
it's
either.
questions of models of debate.
Right,
Your
exactly.
model of debate is just the USFG should substantially
We
reduce
think that
sabotage.
teams should read topical affirmatives, should defend the state. We've
Our model of
advocated
debate
a reason why we
forces
think that
Aiden
is
to
so.
read militant apps.
So there are two different arguments. First is that the model of debate that we've created does not always have to be about the sabotage app in order to access the sabotage skills or to deploy the sabotage skills. And we think the introduction of critical argumentation versus those affirmatives will push teams more towards the sabotage.
Okay, let's go back to that. What about like the
politics,
EU app results in sabotage skills?
Well, so I guess I can recriminate the internal links from the overview about... Sure. So one is that by having switch side debate, by getting used to persuading different people from different perspectives, by getting used to, that process of clash against a well-prepared opponent, you become better able to persuade people and engage in trickery.
The low evidence? That's fine. The low evidence? Why is... The AF is self-care how?
I'm sorry?
The AF self-care how?
So we think that your approach to resolving
care for
individuated
everyone.
violence...
It's like we should care for everyone,
individually,
not care for each other. Or not care for yourselves, but care for others. That's self-care how? Like the definition of self-care.
We think that the logic... Okay, maybe semantically you're right in terms of your indite of the card, but we're right in terms of... like, self-care might not be directly applicable, but the relevant warrants in the cards are.
Okay. Prep. 8.
I already got that.
That's...
Take a peek. If it's a square in the bottom corner, if it's a square, it's good. If it's round, it's not.
What do you mean square around?
The bottom right corner.
Yeah, there's like a
Square. It's like a circle with a square.
There's a circle with a square in there.
Thank you.
Stop button.
Oh,
You know what I mean? Yeah, that's like if you hit it to stop. That means it's running.
I forgot to turn on their backup.
Oh, well, let's hope this works.
I can do
Do you know CR software?
I think one.
Do you know CR software?
You got me?
No. I
know this
I don't
is
kind
old,
of-
this is old school big question, I know.
I know, because it looks crazy.
Sorry.
There's free software out there, but I don't have it on this computer. Ezra sent it to me years ago. I know it's out there somewhere.
See, my question
It's
is,
just like free OCR.
I have some, but my stuff's really bad. Can you do like the old school, the full book?
Oh, just like you.
Like without borders.
Do you know?
626.
Sorry, what was the question?
OCR software.
Ready?
That can convert it
I'm sending out the one in our-
Whoa.
Case like that's free.
Yeah.
I mean, I could use free OCR, I just don't want to do like 34 pages, right? Like, here we go.
I've never
Right,
OCR'd anything
excited.
longer than like a page.
You could just print it out and take some scissors and
Yeah.
tape it onto some paper. And
Alright.
I did that for you.
Yeah.
I don't think I can get my neighbors to read it that way though.
Everybody good for an article? It's gonna be the case page, and then okay.
Anywhere you want me to start on case?
what book is it?
I think it's
Just pick the argument and then the rolled about.
Yes, sir.
You can't find the OCR copy though.
I'm sorry, where did you see on case? Or?
Like the pinker argument and then
Oh, the
rolled
pink
about.
one. Okay.
Where's the article?
One second.
Oh,
Sorry, are there cards?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me. Sorry, give me a second. I'm just out.
This is for college.
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm also good.
Alright, anyone not ready? On the case, they say Pinker bad reason to reject the argument, not the team. T is a reason we should have a right to be wrong, and they've also elucidated defects from in his broader perspective. And we didn't defend the specific claims that they said were bad. They say roll the ballot, it's arbitrary, and it begs the question of framework. Do you mean to read the framework show? Okay. Okay. Pessimistic refusal of pragmatic state-based approaches for fighting racism are mostly successful because they fulfill a need to rationalize their investments in the status quo. They've advocated a number of important political commitments with the faith that disruption alone will take care of the problem, which is a pseudo-active vision of politics that locks in the status quo, and prefiguration is good, and this is the thesis claim that all their TAC cards have missed. The refusal of the 1AC to take a stand on the world we want and the set of social norms that we have is not simply a missed opportunity, but a logical result of the politics, which consists of the defensive reactions to instrumental control. They say case outweighs. I'll group those two arguments. I'll answer this on the alt debate. The permutation and severance, non-topical acts have an elevated responsibility to defend everything they want to see because they choose everything they say and they have no plan to actually the whole act should be treated as one. Links and dissents are and proves that the act is stuck in a cycle of deferral and they don't get one permanently existent remedy the inequality between limited background and limited background under a rev model. We should win if we identify the best strategy and splintering DA part 13. Couples in the no compromise and structural negotiating social economic identity have become more acute and the Commonwealth privatized couples taking control of the collective call issues for the collective indigenous right now. Joins the crisis restructure that put it working on the circulation capital. It's not their haptic party. The perm, they say the haptic party, it's not their haptic party. The perm is a negative argument because it all includes an analysis of the structures of anti-black civil society, but it arises instead of the contingent political act that the monarchy has given up. In addition, the Chamber's card doesn't have a warrant as to why black and queer people can't access capitalism. They say vertical sorting is bad. It isn't. It's better than racialized sorting and allows for the communist movement to be truly revolutionary. That's the splintering DA. They say inter-communalism, but those movements fail due to the splintering DA. They say no impact, but that's not true. Classify the Spence and Pinker card from tasers of value to black eyes, and the Danny evidence doesn't make the claim that the race war leads to extinction. The impact debate. The impact is unprecedented elite control, widely prevalent neoliberal discourse, strips people of their agency, causes mass inequality, and advances social polarization, and independently ensures small and large scale violence against the global periphery through the military industrial complex, police containment, military accumulation, which causes endless war through expansionism. The profit incentives for overtime consumption breaches planetary boundaries, which causes extinction. That's all that's the Robinson evidence, and not only do all those issues tangibly worse than the lives of black people, there are also external impacts on the one I see that they don't speak to. Every life has an intrinsic value, and you should seek to minimize unnecessary death. And racism was produced as a means for capitalism to fracture the working class. Only elevating class solidarity can solve it. Hater 18. As long as racial solidarity among whites is more powerful than class solidarity among races, capitalism and whiteness will continue as a racial phenomenon. It's not simply biological or cultural. It was produced by the white community in a concrete and objective political historical process. They are work ideas of the superiority of European civilization, but this is not correspond to the difference in skin color. There's examples that are true racial expression versus the racial expression of Africans by centuries ago. By nationals who sort this history, white supremacy born within the American tradition to capitalism because of the centrality of racial slavery until 1660. All African American laborers were indentured servants. How did this forced labor come under the representative terms of race? African Americans were only about a fifth of the labor force. A real small of a Bacon Rebellion and African laborers burned down Jamestown, essential threat to the colonial ruling class and the possibility of alliance among the exploited people had to be prevented forever. The ruling class shifted its labor force toward African slaves later horrified awareness is like a legal category in exchange. Certain social provisions for cost class to preserve a super exploited African labor force. The European American ruling class had advanced an ideology of inferiority to rationalize forced labor, Martha Carter labor. The alternative is to build solidarity through a mass socialist movement axiomatically oriented towards communism. It involves on a state that results in the material redress. This can include the single-payer wealth redistribution, prison abolition, and more. Radical reforms create energy for further shifts that can focus on the choke points of global capitalism. They say the accountability, the treating class as a casually central doesn't displace race and gender on center white males. It's crucial to mobilize effective action and reveal a shared interest in fighting race and gender oppression. Smith 06. Emphasis on the centrality of class relations bring oppression to the forefront of primacy of the working class that does not render women and people of color secondary equation of white male and working class. The primacy of the class with the fight against racism and sexism in the center. This is the explanatory primacy of the class and also understanding structural determinants of race, gender, and class oppression is simple and understanding what causes are not designating classes primacy. There is no interference on the importance of racism. Marxism merely assumes a causal relationship with capital workers to compete the working class no interest in a system that relies upon oppression and empirical evidence shows. And the fear of co-option misunderstands the features and demands that cause fragmentation. Desarius and Dean 012. Demands means on the fear of co-option posits the strength of the movement dissipating in the face of any particular success. The anti-co-option argument and it's a discussion about the particular proposals. The obscures actual and potential to connections among different proposals. It thus reinforces the very fragmentation that has long plagued the contemporary left. Using everything else for me?
That's
How much time do I have?
6:26.
6:26 starting now. Just give me 1 second.
you do you and yes, yes.
It's just like you don't get part theory and links. No,
locks in the status quo. You don't pull it. It's like the heat map.
yeah.
So status quo too.
One second, just 1 second. I've done it with individuals.
Yeah.
I'm done with cat. Oh, yeah, it's right here. I know. I know. Yeah.
And then go to the other as well.
Oh, wait. Yeah, what?
Also, they don't have to be
Yeah, right here.
like explicitly blocking because no one is besides fairness, which is like that.
Yeah. Wait, stops. Yeah, okay, here. Yeah, I got that. Stop. Like,
Suicide does not solve that.
yeah, I got that.
No, not that.
Oh, that's done. Here,
Yeah.
no more. Yeah,
Do
canvas.
this.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, does not self-touch.
Wait, wait.
Just right, does not self-touch. Specifically does not self-touch.
Okay, yeah.
305. Where are we going?
Can you pass me stand? That's right here. Hold this for a second. Okay. Case K. Yep, water. Did you say rapido? Okay.
There are no new cards, right?
Mm-mm. Everyone good?
Yeah.
Voted for militant preservation, similar to the Holder Party 60, traces the code of logistics and turns inward to an indebted, incomplete field creating a neural blockage that halts violent individuation, which saps social energy needed for black moralities to endure the race war. The simulant evidence to see examples both in and out of debate prove the race war, which means that you have a categorical imperative to abolish the white debate community. That's a horny evidence. Yes, it's arbitrary, but that's good during the race war because it's good for it to be self-serving because we have made a categorical imperative to resolve the race war. They cannot win this debate when they've considered the theory of logistics. Violence has transitioned to the era of the code, which infiltrates us neurologically reforms operate within the white algorithm that A relies on individuation, causing communicative and racial violence, which gets replicated by institutions, and B operates in waves and retreats, which is functional circumvention. Argue the two-way arguments about shifting violence from slavery to Jim Crow to personal conflict, which is that there's sabotage arguments that are always just circumvented with more anti-black violence that also co-opts their politics and gets reformulated in anti-black forms, which in fact shows their model of debate and proves the need to invest within ours. Okay. This is a debate about debate. We've made a spilling argument. Their directional focus on policies of violent corrected that harvest sociality via privatized touch is no longer about proletariat being alienated from the means of production but the means of social reproduction, which proves that logistics overcodes capitalism, which answers to hater evidence because even if it created the conditions, anti-capitalist reform cannot resolve those conditions. This means that there's an individuation that by focusing on violence out there ignores violence in here, which individuates the subject and fractures their movement. That's the Bell evidence proven by the Sullivan evidence that impact turns prefiguration. There's no link in, it doesn't lock in the status quo because the app is a prefiguration, which impact turns the only link that they go for in the one another permutation do, but they send the chambers less than evidence communing internally rejuvenates energy when we're indebted to one another. The moments of black queer intimacy, the app creates the energy for people to commune and organize in the first place to create accountability in parties to resolve and endure racial and sexual violence, not just kick people out, which shifts the locus of anti-blackness. We are social energy to participate in your movement, makes the app as a prerequisite, and also internally turns the alternative. Also proves that the only movements that we get from black and queer parties can avoid violent touch and sexual coercion, which is a net benefit of racial ethics that seeks to destroy the state in line with capitalism but not engage. And our evidence is link framing whiteness itself as a class, which means that their links are misdiagnosis of the class dialectic. That means that A, the all can't resolve the links, and B, only the app as intercommunalism can solve this splintering based, so this was a splintering argument because race war, the race is what splinters happen across not class-based reform, proves that the all fails absent the F also answers the last piece of D evidence because fragmentation happens along color. The lines case outweighs and turns the K root cause. The Gagny evidence which caused the shift in consumption was born alongside the human, not capitalism, as a byproduct. Says that absent a disruption of white being warming will kill us all. This also disproves solvency for environmental disaster on the other field because only militant strategies can solve. None of your tactics can. The expropriation is that capitalism has transitioned to a carceral state that is focused on the capture of black life that fuels the capitalism is based both in expropriation, exploitation, and controlled by logistics. The Beller evidence is just phenomenal on this question. This means that the alternative will inevitably fail and lead to violence because the state will just resecure those markets to perpetuate anti-black violence. We get perms in a method debate, or else it leads to shitty plan debates that are infinitely regressive. Framework. Debate is a microcosm of the race war, which means that you should put procedurals on hold because the sole question of this debate is which side you choose to take during the race war. Their insistence on debatability outweighs everything else, proves this argument because it prioritizes proceduralism over the individual. It affects violence. Inside outweighs when we have the ability to solve it, but we can create militant strategies to endure the race war out there too, which means that we resolve your office, but you can't resolve ours. Logistics proves form is content because it's infiltrated the content of linguistic protocols of the intro debate. The ballot does matter because it's a neurological rewiring of energy towards a model. This is proven by the Sullivan evidence. Their internal forces rewiring are the political. The impact is cruel. Of the causes psychological violence, generalized anxiety, and heart attacks from the battlefield. Their recutting of it is just not clear because it's citing racial realism, which is Derek Bell's idea of just fucking the state in totality. He also says that will be answered later on counter and House must defend militant reading of the resolution and forces affirmatives to defend militant strategies to fight the race war. Circulated by DCSF and Marxist. Two arguments. One, their vision of dialectics adheres to protocols of the race war because the stasis relies on universal predictability, which is not true because militant debate is predictable debate. The res ain't predictable because violence is imbricated within terms like the resolution. The TV and Simshine forces militancy to adhere to terms of white debate. The impact is pacification, which drains social energy to fight the race war, solves the iterative testing and best they go for because predictability is the internal language which acts as a second and third third testing and solve sabotage. Second is proven by how they find predictability in extra resolutional practices like fiat, which proves that they pick and choose arbitrary norms to enforce, not us. Yeah, remember their model. There's zero incentive to read the sabotage off unless you are debating a K team, because theirs is functionally the status quo, which is bad because you never saw the differential tactics stuff. The Delio evidence flows off as A is an anarchist who says, fuck this and would align himself with militancy. B, learning about political infiltration compromises on individuation here and debate drains social energy, which provides sabotage. C, your model doesn't inculcate those goals proven by how when we ask teams like Westman how they sabotage, they say fiat. And D, their model doesn't force sabotage and gets cooperated and cracked down. They have no spill up to solve the environmental disaster arguments and no debate keyword, which means that people can conclude CO2 act good with Forest Lands cars, means that they don't resolve their F either. We have made a spill in argument by preserving black and brown lives, which means that we have a one-to-one correlation, but you don't. You can't solve the micropolitical arguments you go for. They're highlighting of the Sullivan evidence says that we need to divest political open. B, don't well law because only militant skills can access the changing the state of debate within the debate is good because ballots do matter. Those the logistics keyword. This is proven by the Louisville Project and how framework has evolved over time as an argument. There's an individuation design. USFG should politics process our political projects as complete, which allows logistics to infiltrate and individuate our affect, which is coercive power in debate, forces us to ignore violence in here that happens in debate. Fairness, refuse or gut check to fairness ballot arguments because it recreates racial terror. It's not a question of structural fairness, but how it's a pretense of neutrality that's literally weaponized against minority debaters. The idea testing arguments of Hawthorne evidence is amazing and applies to debate. We'll give a couple examples. Their demand for clash is not neutral but feeds into a form of liberal multiculturalism, proven by how teams like Westwood BS read the TVA policy, teams like Wendy Young go for a process counterplan. This switch side arguments doesn't solve sabotage. Uniqueness question means race wars here in which switching sides to play devil's advocate disavows the need to choose our strategy to combat the race war, which impact shows where the reflexivity arguments. Their model might teach black and brown students to the other side, but it also tricks them into never choosing the side in the first place, which gives into the race war and drains their social energy, which proves that they cannot solve any of the offense they've gone for.
Um, 147.
Yeah, I already.
Wait, no, but I have the two.
Yeah. Yeah. Which one do I want to do first? Yeah. Okay.
Adam would like us to wait for him, so.
That's fair. I mean, he watched the entire debate.
Yeah.
That means you have to go stand in the corner.
Oh, yeah. Timeout period.
No, the Woodward round, their NBA finals, the 2-and-R, the judges were out of the room, but to make it like explicitly clear that he was not prepping, he went and stood in the corner.
So, did you actually?
No, not him. The
Oh.
other team.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh my
I appreciate their like
It's
adherence.
of honesty.
Yeah, that yeah.
Bill Batterman taught him well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're a cheater.
Ready?
What's
Oh.
it?
Oh. T. K. Kids.
Okay. You were specific anywhere. No. You know what? No.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
endorsing a model of debate where teams are required to defend state action is key to force debaters to develop skills for subterfuge and infiltration. 3 internal links that have gone conceded. The first is institutional engagement is key to learn the language of power and exploit vulnerabilities within the state. The second is that clash about strategies that center on political institutions is key to refine the best approach. And the third is that switch side is key to develop skills for persuading people of things that you don't actually believe and learning to put on the masks. There are 2 impact arguments that have not gone sufficiently grappled with. The first is the macro political aspect of our advocacy, the environment, the economic collapse, imperial violence, etc., that affect millions upon millions of people. In turn, all of their arguments about white racism inevitably causes the death of every single person on Earth. This necessarily accesses a larger internal link than the AF, which is, or the affirmatives model of debate, which actually confines us to working in problems, working to find solutions to problems within the debate space, but is a political dead end that never spills over to fixing those macro structures, and indeed is incapable of doing so because of all of the internal link arguments that they have conceded. They assert that we can't. They assert that we cannot solve for the environment or any of these other issues because of the argumentation they make on the cap debate proper. But there is no explanation of why the strategy of sabotage specifically does not work. It short circuits all of their analysis and doesn't rely on the same sorts of movements to which social energy might be uniquely key. Second is our cutting of the Sullivan evidence, which definitively concludes negative. You should parse through it after the debate. Teaching debaters to put on the mask is actually a better strategy for coping and creates net more hope by prefiguring politics towards infiltration, which necessarily means that we are a better strategy for adaptation. Their argument about a focus on proceduralism being bad because we have to choose which side of the race war, we agree on the side of the race war, but we disagree on the tactics for fixing it or the scope at which we should attack the race war, which gets out of this argument. They say they create strategies for endurance, but they've conceded one, the piece of evidence that indicates that working within debate will actually never solve because of the unique dynamics here as well, the empirics relevant to their affirmative, that it has never actually made progress because of its mode of presentation, which means that it doesn't actually increase the chances of endurance, and competitive incentives always drown out any ability of it to solve. However, just if you come up with these tactics, or if you identify ways to better cope with anti-black violence, then you can present it out of debate and out of round discussions, which is necessarily better form for convincing people. Their arguments about the ballot rewiring are assertions not rooted in evidence. There's no reason why the ballot is key other than the stringing together polysyllabic words that I had referenced before. They say the Sullivan evidence, but the one, we are not cool hope. They have not won that sabotage is insufficient to solve, which is a prerequisite to winning that our mode of politics can't be effective. Second, if they're right, switch side debate solves and makes it to where we don't actually invest those damning forms of hope into the state. The counterinterpretation, they've conceded they can't fiat it, which means they just justify any arbitrary norm for which they can generate offense and have infinite time to prepare it, which is infinitely aggressive. And in addition, we've actually just directly impact turned their model that doesn't require teams to defend the state because we believe it's net worse in terms of those macro political strategies, as well as teasing out those skills for subversion. Their argument that it's predictable is not true. There are all sorts of different forms of violence that might be predictable discussed in the abstract, but in the context of the debate round, the resolution is the best. They say they solve sabotage. They haven't addressed our internal link arguments. They say we require arbitrary norms like fiat, but we've explicitly distinguished the form of fiat that we think is productive. It's distinct and is not arbitrary. They say the De Leon evidence is bad. However, it's not. Yes, we should work to undermine the state at every turn. That's our argument. That's the point of sabotage. It's not traditional political engagement in the sense they're critiquing. The social energy arguments, they have no reason why we sap social energy. In fact, our evidence indicates that actually working to solving big problems unleashes energy, even if you're not sure you're going to solve them. But in addition, switch side debate allows us to have the right expectations and to develop coping strategies that solve all of this. Yes, we do spill up because you can infiltrate the state, and it only takes individual agents, which means we don't require movements to solve. They say debate is not key because people will conclude the wrong things. However, the process of clash solves all of this. They say we don't solve micropolitics. This was just they said this was just an assertion. We're not going for the fairness arguments. They're arguing about clash because people go for process counterplans. Our thesis is that process counterplans are necessarily a good form of engagement. They say minority debaters will never choose the right side. However, they will after nuanced contestation that reveals clash is the best strategy. I answered their arguments on the criticism for why we're incapable of solving the environment in the overview, which means just on the case debate, their role of the ballot is necessarily an arbitrary imposition. However, we win under it based on the way that we've articulated our offense. It short circuits their theory of power, and if they're right that just anything we try to do to make anything better is going going to fail, then that also applies to the affirmative.
305.
Yeah. Wait. Where?
No, but it's like just logistics.
I've also done the guidance.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, case.
What was it?
Case 2.
Sorry, I thought you said K case 2.
Nah, no, oh, the gag me stuff will be on 2.
Good. Cool.
They've conceded for 4 straight speeches to race horse real and happening now. The extrajudicial killing scene, all right, taking over the White House, proved that why logistics has seeped into not only the political but debate. They've conceded every single example that happens with the debate. It's controlled our relations to sustain the process of individuation. Military preservation is the only thing that the judge has to adopt by being together in racial terror, recognition of forever being in debt to each other, so forever form of servitude that creates society. They've conceded the role of the judge to abolish the white debate can be the only arguments that they access at any 1% risk that the negative does not, and the negative's model of debate does not access. It means you vote the affirmative. Our recognition of forever being in debt creates affective relations because vibes do fucking matter. It creates a sort of psychic energy, allows us to feel through others, for others to feel through you, for you to feel and feeling you, to refuse the modes of telos. Conceding the Beller evidence means you lose the round. The ballot does matter. We've read a phenomenal piece of Beller evidence in the one to see that says logistics that's infiltrated not only institutions but our cognitive linguistic processes. Logistics is the break of modernity that sutures not only how civil society operates but requiring black energy to sustain itself, but simultaneously exports form of racial and cumulative violence. Sabotage is not actually sabotage that destroys the state, but it's the perfection of the system, i.e. the violence becomes hidden in more insidious ways. This has proven how but slavery shifted to Jim Crow, shifted to modern day prison industrial complex, and continues examples of the race war. The evidence says that these neural blockings can be rewired, but that requires the affirmative as a prerequisite because only sociality can act as a blockage to the system because logistics can't co-opt how we relate to one another. It makes our model debate a prerequisite tactical sabotage because only we can ensure that A, black and brown students have the social energy to engage, and B, their sabotage doesn't get reformulated to more anti-black and insidious ways. Go to T. Debate is not just a game mode of microcosm of the race war, which proves that their clash impacts either have to outweigh or they have to correlation evidentiary stature for how they access any of their impacts. This is going to sound silly, but they have zero internal links about debating macro-political strategies resolve anything that they've read. They've staked this debate on the De Leon piece of evidence that does not say shit. It does not say that debating over macro-political strategies solves the economy, the environment, or imperialism, but you should think of this in the context of their interpretation. Debating arms sales, how does that solve the economy? How does it solve the environment? Or how does it solve imperialism? They have explained zero internal links, which means you don't give it to them. They have the first subpoint about learning the language of power. Logistics co-opts it and makes it impossible. That was the case debate, which means learning language of power. Who fucking cares? Second, that clash is key to refine the strategies that occurs under our model debate. You can extend the counter petition. We should have militant. You should have a militant reading of the resolution. They have conceded that that is predictable for black and brown students. White people, fuck them. It doesn't matter. It still creates clash or revolutionary strategies. They can concede the Shikaitis and Gray evidence. Those are revolutionary strategies beyond the BPP and Zapatistas, which proves that we still have clash, but it's better clash because it stops the process of individualization, which I'll get to in a second. Switch side debate, it's bad because it's not key to persuading people. Who cares about persuading people on the other side of the race war? There'll always be anti-black, which is proven by our neural blockage argument and the code arguments that we went for above. But switch side debate is bad because it allows for oppositional politics, which should always start at the side of the state. That creates a process of individuation, which is a telos to our politics, which saps political energy because it says that we should be fighting for something out there without realizing that sometimes the violence is in here. Sometimes it's not that the cops are the problem, but it's we are the cops. It doesn't solve our argument about sort of starting at the individual level. The Sullivan evidence, it flows affirmative. You don't even have to read it after the round. I'll read quotes for you. Their argument that concludes that you should be a fox and sort of sneak behind enemy mind says, quote, the struggle of political hope is the fantastical object of the future without anti-black racism, then concludes that racial realism is different and distinct from that, and you should redefine humanism. Nothing about the affirmative or the negatives model debate redefines humanism or reclaims it through a mode of sabotage, but sustains the exact state and the practices that Beller describes in the first place. It's also conceded the affirmative reading of Sullivan that says it results in the process of results in cruel hope, results in psychological and somatic health via allows such stressors via stressors that intensify violence, general anxiety, and response and heart attacks that come first through a process of distancing, which they have conceded in the 2NR, which means that we have a proximate cause to your ballot. It's bad for black and brown students here, but they do not have a one-to-one correlation between debating macro-political strategies and solving that. They say it's a mode of presentation competitive instead of better. They've conceded the Beller evidence that it literally rewires our neural functions because we internalize the arguments that we go for. So saying switching side is bad because it teaches people the wrong side of the race war, and they've conceded empirics that the Louisville Project and how framework has shifted from fuck critiques to we should include them proves that ballots do shape community norms. The Sullivan we're not cruel hope is insufficient to solve. You still sustain the system of logistics and say we should engage within those things. We think that those are all terminally seated and only outside of those systems can solve the counter to British. You can't fiat it. We don't have to defend everyone but just ours. That the militant reading of the resolution forces debate over the over militancy strategies. They say De Leon first. They've conceded he's an anarchist. He concludes that you should not engage the state. The only example he gives is when people put on suits and then go to the state, fuck it up, and then disavow because they think that it's bad. The social energy don't. The SAP argument, they've conceded that it doesn't resolve the impacts of the case. The root cause evidence on the cap flow is affirmative, which makes it game over because being the race war makes environmental collapse, imperialism makes it inevitable because it requires a process of white accumulation. Any strategy that they have to saving the economy or environment proves they create a white system and a white world because it still results in black death because they can't solve the cognitive code arguments because he's conceded case.
It says I have 43 minutes. I plan on taking the vast majority of that time, so if you need to go get food or something. Thank you.
Thank you for
That's actually
43 minutes. So 5:15.
Okay.
Yeah. You want me to stop this for you?
Just leave it.
Alright. Mind if I move the plug so I can plug my computer in?
Oh, yeah. You can unplug the power. I think it'll keep running. You just want to unplug the power. Yeah.
They went to go get
Guess it's over.
One second. That was quick. I don't think they turned it on.
check if the camera's still on. I think we just do it.
It is.
Okay.
Y'all want to leave it on?
Yeah.
What's up?
Howdy, howdy.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting late.
Good, good. All right, this was a really fantastic debate. Thank you for letting me judge it. I voted F. Sabotage strategies, I think, have little chance of solving the F because they target the state for infiltration, but not at the level of logistics or algorithms. However, they still likely link to the F's political hope bad offense and the sapping energy trade-off argument, and the external impact of environmental destruction, imperialism, and war, etc., likely cannot be solved by sabotage. Do sabotage debates challenge the state? The 2NR outlines 3 reasons. The first is institutional engagement is key to learning the language of power in the state. I'm not sure why that solves the F. Even if a sabotage strategy could challenge the state, I'm not sure why the 1AC is made. Like the 1AC is made an argument that racism no longer stems from politics, but from algorithms and the code. That's the 1AC Beller evidence. Logistics have infiltrated institutions. Concession of case proper means that the app has a mechanism to solve logistics, but there's neither a neg argument why logistics isn't the root cause, or a neg explanation for why sabotaging the state can also sabotage or challenge logistics. Put another way, this De Leon evidence about infiltration is about anarchist movements who have seen an opportunity to infiltrate a state because of the cracks produced by capitalism. It lists things like environmental destruction, war, imperialism, etc. The goal of De Leon is to overthrow the state. But if racism is no longer about the state, but about the algorithm, I'm not sure why overthrowing the state through infiltration, rather than revolution, solves the app at the level of the code, which is still produced by things like technology, corporate power, etc., that are sort of left unchecked. Second 2NR warrant is clash about strategies is key to argument refinement and finding the best approach. The internal link here is just clash, but the 2NR lacks an extension of why the counter-interp unlimits a topic. If every app has to be a militant reading of the resolution, it ensures method v method debates that are sufficiently predictable to ensure clash. It's not a counter-interp that is grounded in any definitions of words of resolution, which means that I personally think it's arbitrary and self-serving, but it does limit the scope of what the app can do and has some guaranteed neg ground. The 1AR and 2AR have a list of examples of the types of quality method v method debates that could happen. Third, switch side. The 2NR says switch side is key to persuasion skills so that we can make ideas produced in debate portable by persuading others who don't believe us outside of debate. The problem is that, first, the app does not depend on convincing racists that they should stop being racist. Second, switch side debate forces you to defend positions that are oppositional rather than apositional, which saps energy by, and this is just the way I interpret it, wasting sort of time and mental investment on ideas that are just fundamentally bad given the race war is definitely happening. And it's just a question of how we cope and endure within that. I could see a ballot where I conclude that even if sabotage is not as effective as militant preservation, that it's still valuable to make a teen have to read sabotage when they're AF, that all of the reasons sabotage is comparatively worse are just neg ground, and that we should sort of force switching sides on tactics because it fights dogma and maybe it teaches better advocacy skills. But in this debate, I didn't vote that way because I think there's a risk that sabotage is still a form of political hope, which has a conceded psychological violence impact, and that it saps energy. But there's comparatively no risk that sabotage solves the F. It seems like it's sort of only potential downside, but there's very little upside to having that debate, even if it, in the abstract, would be useful to do so. Maybe a dogma impact, if it was impacted out, in the 2NR could be that reason why switch side is good, but if it's just switch side good to sort of solve the F, I don't think it really solves the F. The De Leon evidence. This could have also been a plausible neg ballot, one where I conclude that even if sabotage doesn't solve the F, it just solves a larger external impact that outweighs the F. I kind of talked about this card already, but while I don't think that this card is quite as bad as the 2AR makes it sound, it doesn't rise to the level of saying that sabotage solves all of these huge external impacts like environment, wars, imperialism, etc. It says that there are cracks forming in capitalism, examples being the aforementioned list of impacts, and that those cracks present opportunities for saboteurs to infiltrate the state. It seems like those are less impacts solved by sabotage and more like they are opportunities for sabotage to successfully happen. I'm not confident that voting for a model of sabotage in debate comes close to ensuring that we can solve any of those impacts or make inroads there. Whereas there's, I think, a comparatively higher risk of app solvency for its like psychological violence impacts and race war / endurance impacts. Sullivan. It's hard to tell based on this highlighting what Sullivan is defending. It seems like Sullivan still concludes political hope bad. That hope in a way to fully solve racism creates psychological harm, and is recommending that like optimists like Cornel West should read Derek Bell's racial realism thesis that is neither nihilistic nor hopeful, but asks for endurance in the face of inevitable racism. Given that reading of this card, I'm not sure who that really helps. Sabotage can be, I think, an example of the constant struggle that Bell and therefore Sullivan seems to argue for at the bottom of the card. But at the same time, I'm not sure why sabotaging political institutions is effective, because it's still a form of political hope, which Sullivan definitely thinks is bad. And I think the example that Sullivan gives of like it's not. I don't think it is. It's kind of about sabotage infiltration, but it doesn't seem to recommend that we should infiltrate the state, and that is an effective strategy. And so I think the rest of Sullivan likely still leans AF. So I don't really think it's a great neg card for sabotage either. I'll take questions.
I don't have any questions.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I do, but
Yeah.
I
Oh.
wanted to send them like in an email so I could just have more.
Yeah. Send me an email because I'm
Awesome.
I'm sure if I have more time to think about it, I'll have a better answer to them as well.
Yeah. General 1AR comments.
Good. I mean, boy. I mean, like you're fast. Obviously, I was able to keep up, but there are some places on framework where I'm just like, I guess I'll just flow straight down. Things don't sort of line up perfectly. That's my only complaint. I was able to catch everything. I think I got the gist of what you were going for.
Was there like a?
It's the best AF debating I've seen y'all do in like 2 years. I mean, historically, it's like I often just don't catch what's in the 1AR. I think regardless of which one of you is the 1A, like a lot of last year's debates were just like struggling to keep up. I think this is more flowable.
Did you like you were expecting a 2AR argument that wasn't there? You were surprised by a 2AR argument that was too long?
No, I don't think it was anything in the 2AR that I didn't look at. The only place, I don't think this is intervention on my part, but I think the way I framed this debate and something that the 2AR could do to make this decision a little bit quicker is just like, there are two sets of impacts. There's the 1AC's impacts about race war inevitable, what do we do to sort of cope and endure in the face of that? And then there's the like external impact, think of like a cap K, right? There's like an external impact of environmental destruction, right? So you should do impact calculus. It's just like you kind of do. So it's like you've conceded case. So you definitely conceded that an AF ballot likely solves within the debate space. We don't really attempt to solve racist institutions. We definitely solve our impact claim. By comparison, a neg ballot probably doesn't. It just doesn't solve our impact because they misidentify that it's not at the level of the state. It's at the level of the code. They just like you could be like they could win all their warrants for why they could challenge the state. They could win that sabotage could overthrow the state. Like who fucking cares? It doesn't solve the AF, right? And then it's just like relative risk of solvency. If they probably don't solve their external impact, very tiny risk they solve an external impact is massively outweighed by the fact that we definitely solve our impact, and they just cannot solve our impact. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I didn't feel like that was intervention on my part because I feel like all the component parts were there, but just a clear impact calculus of like what's at stake would be more helpful.
That makes sense.
Actually, one question would be, in terms of like a different approach to the affirmative to take at least for framework, what do you think about one that just emphasizes like a big existential risk? It's focused on like, there are going to be a few individual debaters that have an outsized impact and we probably should just neglect the rest, but we have like a framework that allows them to develop skills and understandings of international relations, and then just basically making the entire thing just a util debate and blowing off the rest of the line by line.
That is the most Ethan Muse idea I've heard. But I mean, everything you've said checks out. I get what you're saying, which is like, National Circuit Policy Debate has 500 competitors each year. Over the course of a decade, we produce 5,000 debaters. Most of us will go on to live normal lives, but maybe every decade we can produce 2 or 3 really effective advocates. Debate is a training ground for those people who are real world changers. The only way we think we can make them world changers is etc. Yeah, you should do that. I'm sure there will be an app answer. That's the issue I think in this debate is like the De Leon card is like an alt card for cap. I mean, it doesn't I think rise to the level of an alt card, but it describes impacts to cap. But there's no alt to solve cap. there's sabotage, and I don't really think
Yeah.
sabotage. Does that make sense? So you've got an external impact. You just don't have a way for the
I
balance to solve
was
that.
I was thinking about that after the debate, and I just think I like the idea of sabotage, and I like the like sort of paint job over the normal advocacy skills arguments that people go
Yeah.
for. But I also just think we have almost like too critical, too affirmative leaning of an evidence set on that right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what became clear in this debate, given
Yeah.
that they had read all of these articles.
Yeah. Last question for y'all. Is sabotage mutually exclusive with militant? Like, is it like if an AF team read sabotage of the resolution, would it meet your interp?
No.
Why not?
Because it invests that the political could get better.
But does militant preservation preclude?
Well,
that seems like a solvency question, right? Like,
well, like the
you would just have a debate where they say sabotage, and like you invest in the political, that's bad. Here's my point, which is like, it might be strategic for you to be like, sabotage debates can also happen in our model of debate, but your model of debate definitely results in these other debates that are bad. Like,
that's good.
Like,
Yeah.
what the question of like, what would Aiden do came up in this debate, and it's like, would Aiden read exactly your AF, or would Aiden, when forced to, based on this interpret the topic, like be more likely to be like, I'll read a sabotage AF. It would meet your interp. You would have neg ground to it. So your model debate solves all the reasons why you can have sabotage debates. And it's not like your model always ensures sabotage debates, but neither does theirs either.
And we have
right?
offense to the other.
But then you have
folks,
offense to them. So it's just like there's no offense for them. There's only offense for you.
You also make it look like you have topic ground there.
Yeah, there's like there's a way for teams that actually want to debate FMS DCS to kind of do so.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, in terms of like a better way to approach the counterinterpretation, do you just think that if we're trying to get out of that sort of argument, or we're trying to win the limits claim that you were just talking about, is the approach just what I was saying earlier in the debate about not being able to fiat your interpretation, and how essentially, because it doesn't have a resolutional stasis, you can use the logic they've used to construct theirs to construct any number of different interps? Is there another argument that I'm missing there, or should I just like
email me and let me think about that? I'm not sure.
Cool. Thank you so much for
Alright,
that.
thank you.
I forgot to save my thoughts on last one.
Any chance I can talk to the two of y'all for 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the 3 of y'all, if you want to be included. You never respond to my email.
Who's not responding?